Is the alliance between Japan and the United States at risk? Thousands have again protested on the Japanese island of Okinawa against U.S. military bases, outraged by alleged crimes by American personnel. What can the U.S. do to placate Okinawans, and are strategic military bases in the East China Sea facing shutdown? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Folly Thibault. Okinawa is a small Japanese island with huge strategic value. U.S. soldiers, sailors and Air Force crew have been based there for decades. And all that time, their presence has sowed anger among locals. In their latest protest on Sunday, thousands of Okinawans again demanded the closure of U.S. military bases. They're upset about the recent rape and murder of a local woman. The man accused of the attack is a civilian employee at a U.S. military compound in Okinawa. Our correspondent Rob McBride spoke to the locals about their frustrations.
At the gates of a military base under construction, it's a daily ritual. Demonstrators try to block the vehicles of military personnel and contractors coming in and out.
Okinawa people are very angry at the Japanese government for putting so much burden on us and most of the Japanese people who ignore our situation.
The decision to build this new base in a remote part of Okinawa and move thousands of soldiers away from more populated areas was taken after the rape of a 12-year-old schoolgirl by 3 Marines in 1995. That assault led to mass protests by 85,000 people. Islanders seem just as angry at this latest attack. The suspect is a civilian employed on a U.S. military base who allegedly raped and killed his 20-year-old victim before dumping her body. Extremely sensitive to the current mood on the island, the U.S. military were quick to announce a 1-month period of mourning on all their bases, insisting this death should not drive a wedge between them and the people of Okinawa. But many here believe there will always be tensions while U.S. forces remain. As the sun sets, car patrols organised by the government set off for neighbourhoods close to US bases. It's a new measure to allay local fears. Campaigners believe Okinawa has carried an unfair burden by hosting the majority of US forces in Japan since the end of World War II. And that this weekend's protest will show people have had enough.
This weekend's rally is the climax of so many years of campaigning. Our demands will be stronger than ever before.
For these protesters, taking soldiers from one part of the island to another is just moving the problem, not removing it. Rob McBride, Al Jazeera, Okinawa.
Well, Okinawa is the largest in a group of islands to the south of Japan. U.S. bases take up around 1/5 of the island, and Japan hosts more than 100 U.S. military bases with around 50,000 personnel. They're just one key part, though, of America's vast global military presence. The U.S. has between 700 and 800 bases around the world, operating in around 80 countries across all continents. Well, let's bring in our guests now for today's discussion. Joining us in Tokyo is Tomohiko Taniguchi. He's a special advisor to the cabinet of the Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe and is a professor at Keio University. In Kyoto, Japan, we have Kozue Akibayashi, professor of gender and peace studies at Doshisha University. And also in Tokyo, Michael Penn. He's the president of the Shingetsu News Agency and a commentator on Japanese politics. Thank you all. Welcome to Inside Story. Mr. Taniguchi, in Tokyo, if I may start with you. As you heard in our reports, Okinawans are very angry at the Japanese government. So what is the Japanese government doing to pacify them, and is it going to heed calls to shut down these bases in Okinawa?
Their anger and anguish are very much understandable. And if you might recall, President Barack Obama and Prime Minister Shinzo Abe met on the sidelines of the G7 summit meeting earlier last month to discuss only discuss this terrible crime. and they use the strongest possible language, like despicable and so on. And
but strong language doesn't seem to be enough anymore, Mr. Taniguchi.
You may say so. State of the Force Agreement, called SOFA, has been improved a number of times in the past, and when crimes of this sort are committed by military personnel or non-military personnel off base, the Japanese police are in charge, and this case is one of those examples. When it comes to the value Okinawa carries in Japan's overall defense, and by extension the region's defense, the value of the island has become even more salient. If you look at what's going on in the East China Sea and the South China Sea, and strategic value you must find in Okinawa cannot be underestimated.
Okay. Well, I do want to hear more about the strategic value in just a moment, but Ms. Kozue Akibayashi in Kyoto, just help our global audience understand the background here. I mean, the U.S. has several bases in Japan, as we've seen, but why is the presence in Okinawa so troubled? Why are people there so angry about this U.S. military presence?
Well, thank you very much for inviting. The Okinawan people are, as you can see, at the rally today, 65,000 gathered, and they called for the withdrawal of the U.S. Marine Corps from Okinawa to start with. The characteristic of the Okinawan base, the U.S. military bases in Okinawa, is that they have hosted the largest number of U.S. Marines outside the United States. And that is very, very different from the structure of other bases on mainland Japan. The U.S. Marines have been there since 1953, and they have been engaged in many wars waged in Asia and beyond by the United States. They have been deployed to Vietnam and or Belgian Gulf War and other places. In other words, the Okinawan people are directly affected by the wars waged by the United States through the presence of U.S. Marine Corps, and that is why the first demand they expressed today was that the withdrawal of U.S. Marine Corps. The Status of Forces Agreement, Mr. Taniguchi mentioned, has not been revised. The two governments have agreed to improve the actual usage of the Status of Forces Agreement, but it has not been revised, and that is another demand that the Okinawan people have put forward today, because the first jurisdiction goes to the U.S. military.
Okay.
When crimes are committed, and it's not off the base. It's when it's off duty. That's only when local authority can apprehend and investigate.
Yes, and we all recall the 1995 rape of that 12-year-old girl in Okinawa, which at the time sparked huge protests. And the American soldiers who were involved then were apprehended in Japan and tried in Japanese courts. So why, I mean, I imagine that there have been other cases since then. I wonder, have things improved at all when it comes to these rape cases and how they're investigated?
No, no. When cases widely reported and high profile, they tend to be tried in the Japanese court. But many more are not. In many cases, they're not apprehended by the local authorities, the perpetrators or suspects, and it's rarely they are rarely tried in the Japanese court. And that has been historical experiences, and that's what they have witnessed in Okinawa, and that is why they are demanding for the revision of Status Forces Agreement.
Okay, let's hear from Michael Penn now in Tokyo. Michael, violent crimes by American personnel in Okinawa have angered residents for decades now. I mean, we mentioned 1995, of course, and those huge protests then. Do you feel that this time around it's different, that we're at a turning point where we could see the U.S. Forced to pull out some of these spaces then?
Well, I don't think that a complete withdrawal of U.S. forces from Okinawa is even remotely on the cards. Both the Japanese central government and Washington are very much committed to having these forces there. Where I think we might see its impact more directly is on the construction of the new U.S. Marine Air Base at Henoko, which is among the bases in Okinawa, the one that's most controversial and the one which the public is most clearly mobilized against at this time. So even now, the construction of that base is frozen for the moment, and I think that the recent crimes we've seen, the 2 rapes and a drunk driving incident, makes it much more difficult for the Abe government to sort of force through what it wants to do, which is to build this U.S. base.
Right. Mr. Taniguchi in Tokyo, as Kozue Akibayashi mentioned, one of the demands of Okinawans right now is that there be a change in the status of forces agreement, and basically they want American servicemen who commit these crimes to be accountable in Japanese courts. How does the Japanese government, the national government, feel about that idea? Obviously, the U.S. is opposed to it, but could the Japanese government perhaps convince its American ally that this should be perhaps the way to go?
This is not obviously the case. This is not obviously the first time of this kind of terrible crime committed by the members of the U.S. force, or ex-members of the U.S. force, which is why the Japanese government and its counterpart in Washington, D.C. have been constantly debating how best to actually implement SOFA. And if you put that into greater perspective, SOFA, that's binding the U.S. and Japan here, is much in favor to the host country, i.e. Japan, if compared to the SOFA being implemented between Germany and the United States, for instance, and South Korea and the United States. So it's not the case that SOFA has not changed at all. The implementation of SOFA has undergone a series of improvement one after another.
I understand that, and I understand also that the Japanese government right now finds itself in a very difficult position. It's a very difficult balancing act because on the one hand, you have the local government in Okinawa siding with residents there and wanting these bases to basically go away and be shut down. So I wonder, there are many people who say that this base, basically these bases in Okinawa symbolize the fact that Japan is still a military colony of the U.S. What do you respond to that, Mr. Taniguchi?
I'm not interested in that sort of categorically, ideologically categorical allegation to Japan. I am of the view, whether you ask me whether I think U.S. military footprint, U.S. military presence in Japan, not just in Okinawa but across the country, is Japan's deficit, or is it Japan's asset?
What is the value then? What is the value for Japan today of this presence, not just in Okinawa, but in the rest of the country?
I think the 7 decades that we have passed has proven that it has worked tremendously in favor of Japan as an asset. And U.S.-Japan alliance has gained international and global perspective of late. And so it is not only to safeguard the peace and security of Japan, but without it, it would be extremely difficult for the entire region to maintain its status quo and the rules-based order. That's how the U.S.-Japan alliance must be viewed, and that's the big picture. You must put these terrible crimes into perspective.
All right, well, let's take a look at the bigger picture now. As you say, why does the U.S. military have so many bases on this small Japanese island? Okinawa is the largest in the chain of Okinawan islands strategically positioned in the East China Sea. It's 500 kilometers from other islands which are claimed by both Japan and China, and the U.S. says it wants to help maintain peace in the region. Okinawa is also not so far from the South China Sea, where tension is high because of territorial claims by 6 countries, including China, Taiwan, Vietnam, and the Philippines. Michael Penn in Tokyo. The U.S. maintains troops at more than 560 bases abroad, many of them a legacy of the Second World War over 65 years ago. I mean, we're not at war anymore, certainly not in this part of the world. Why does the U.S. still need these bases in Okinawa?
Well, at the end of World War II, globally, and of course as well as in East Asia, the United States remained in place at the end of the war, and it became whereas before World War II, the United States was certainly the power of North and South American continents. At the end of the war, the United States became the dominant power of the world, and this was especially reinforced at the end of the Cold War. So, the United States globally has played this role of being sort of the policeman, and the bases in Okinawa are the major anchor of U.S. military forces in this region. And the question is, especially within Okinawa, has the burden that these people have been under disproportionate and unfair? And clearly the public there believes that after 70 years, it's time for burden sharing or some sort of change.
All right, well, let's hear from Kozue Akibayashi on that in Kyoto. As Michael said, and Mr. Taniguchi also alluded to, the rise of China and the geostrategic tensions in the region have certainly ratcheted up in recent times, and there's also the North Korean nuclear issue also. Do people in Okinawa perhaps feel that these bases also could make them feel safe in light of all, the regional tensions, or not at all?
Oh, no. The bases in U.S. military bases in Okinawa is a legacy, clearly a legacy of the Cold War structure. They have been there for 70 years. They remain there, even the entire world framework changed. They are not. The local people are saying that they don't feel safe with the presence of U.S. military. In fact, because it's active military, foreign military, that is actually the source of their insecurity. If those bases, they could be the first target, maybe to start with, if aggressive countries want to attack U.S. military bases in this region. So with that is not the
So basically you're saying that in addition to the crimes, the alleged crimes committed by American military personnel in Okinawa, people don't necessarily feel safe because they feel that if there were to be a war in the region, that they would be the first people targeted.
Yes, that's the basic strategy, military strategy. So yes, that is why I'm saying they don't feel safe with the presence of the U.S. military.
Okay, Mr. Taniguchi in Tokyo, if I may ask you, the opposition right now in Okinawa to the U.S. military presence there is reaching unprecedented levels. We've seen opinion polls that show that the majority of Okinawans want the Americans out. So do you think that perhaps it could be a time for Japan to reconsider, because there was a freeze after 1995. There was talk of relocating the base. Why didn't that happen?
Relocating the base for U.S. Marine Corps has been under discussion for well over 10 years. And as Michael Penn suggested, there is a designated place to rebuild and to relocate the facility in the middle of the densely populated area to the seashore area. And that's been going on. And that might be affected, as Michael Penn said. But once again, I must say,
but what have been the challenges to making that happen? You say it's been going on for a number of years now. What stopped it from actually happening?
Well, it's been a challenge, but you have to take time and you have to pacify the wounds and pacify the sensitivity of the people in Okinawa. But for fairness, may I say, the ratio of crimes themselves are, of course, horrible and horrendous. The ratio of crimes committed by the U.S. military personnel is no bigger than the average. So that's one thing. And U.S. military footprint in Japan is not only for Japan. The symbolic presence of that is the island in the middle of the Indian Ocean called Diego Garcia. The jurisdiction of Diego Garcia belongs to the Yokosuka-based U.S. Navy. That shows that when it comes to safeguarding some of the rules binding the international community about freedom of navigation, safe passage of commercial fleet, and so on and so forth, the presence of the U.S. military is serving all the nations, including China, of course, that are dependent very much on the safe passage of commercial fleet. And I must stress again and again, that's the big picture that you and I must pay attention to.
Right, but perhaps you and I can pay attention to that, but for the people of Okinawa, they don't necessarily see the big picture. I do want to hear from Mr. Akibayashi on an interesting point you made, Mr. Taniguchi. Mr. Taniguchi says it's important to note, Ms. Akibayashi, that the ratio of crimes committed by the U.S. military personnel in Okinawa is not bigger than the average. I mean, are people aware of that, and do they understand that? I mean, I guess you can't just keep pointing the finger at American military personnel, can you?
I don't really understand what is meant by the average. The average in Japan, or the local newspapers and so forth have trying to put together more accurate statistics about the crimes committed by U.S. military personnel. The local Okinawan Times recently revealed that the felony has been committed more than, I think it was triple, by U.S. military personnel, and it's tricky. The U.S. military personnel lived in 50,000 troops and civilians and dependents on 20% of about 20% of the main island of Okinawa. And you compare that with and they rotate as well by every 3-5 years and so forth, and you deal with 1.4 million population of Okinawans on the rest of the 80% of the island. It's you have to pay very, very
attention to the statistics. Okay, let me ask you this. What is the ultimate plan then for activists in Okinawa, Ms. Akibayashi? What do they want ultimately?
Ultimately, they want closure of the base, all the military bases.
Okay. Michael Penn in Tokyo, will that be possible in your opinion? And also, we talked about the regional implications and, what's happening in the South China Sea and so on. Do you think the American military presence in the Pacific is sustainable?
In regard to the first question, I think that we are going to see a reduction in U.S. forces in Okinawa simply because this popular demand is there. And in election after election, they're making it very clear that they feel that the number of bases, the number of U.S. soldiers there are unacceptably large and high. And so I think that at some point the main island Japanese government is going to have to acknowledge that and to either bring some of those Marines to other parts of Japan or to send them to Guam or something. But I do think that you are going to see a reduction. A complete elimination of U.S. forces, I think, is unlikely unless we see something major happen in the United States itself, where for American budgetary or strategic reasons, the United States decides to pull out, which I don't think is so far-fetched if you look decades into the future.
Right.
And yes, I think that even now in the United States, you see this debate about whether or not the global empire is worthwhile. And I think that you are going to see this debate strengthen in the United States, and that's where the big change may come.
Okay. Mr. Taniguchi in Tokyo, you have the last word. We began this discussion by asking whether the U.S.-Japan alliance was at risk. What is your opinion of that? Do you think this alliance is still a solid one and will continue to be?
The U.S. Marine Corps is the biggest and the strongest amphibious force expeditionary deployed. To have it on the soil of Japan cannot be but Japan's asset.
Okay, we're going to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us today. Tomohiko Taniguchi, Kozue Akibayashi, and Michael Penn. Thank you all for being on Inside Story. And thank you as well for watching. You can always see this program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. For further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Folly, Thibault, and the whole team, thanks for watching. Bye for now.